because they wanted a stronger central government. Thomas Jefferson had started the Democrat-Republican Party because he believed that the only aristocracy was people of talent and virtue. And he didn't believe that anybody was any better than anyone else. And they had to, because of the nature of man to be sinful and abuse power, had to have a Bill of Rights. And he wanted to hold on to those rights and protect the least, the minorities. So about this time, a man by the name of James Callender started accusing John Adams of being a spy for Great Britain. Imagine how stupid and absurd that was. But it made him terribly mad. And then he said, John Adams is a hermaphrodite. He's neither manly and strong or feminine and womanly. So he's a hermaphroditical. And then he said, you got a choice here, folks. If you vote for Adams, we have war. If you vote for Jefferson, we'll have peace. So Adams passed the Alien and Sedition Act and threw James Callender in jail because of his freedom, exercise of freedom of the press. This, all Thomas Jefferson wanted to do was go back home. But this, he said, this cannot stand. We got this Bill of Rights. Don't you realize, are you going to ignore that? And so he started that party. And the cry and hue and cry of the James Callender and the boys in the Republican press began to weaken and weaken and weaken John Adams. So then Thomas Jefferson won. The guy that tied him was Aaron Burr. John Adams came in third. Now in these days, remember, the guy that came in second was vice president. So here was Thomas Jefferson was John Adams' vice president. Imagine if Trump had Hillary. Or Joe Biden had Trump. Would that work? How would that go? So they quickly, in the first term of Thomas Jefferson, they got the 12th Amendment passed, where the vice president would be in the same party. But anyway, then Adams was so upset that he didn't even go to the inauguration. And this split really went on for a while. And about this time, Callender came over to Jefferson through Madison and said, I want to be postmaster over there in Richmond. Jefferson said no, and he said, I'm going to make your life miserable. So he's the one that started telling the stories about Dusky Sally. Made up a whole bunch of names of black children that didn't even exist, mulatto children. And put it in the press. Thomas Jefferson didn't do anything about it. And about this time, a famous explorer, a duke from Germany, was in the White House. And here's the Federalists. Here were the Federalists. Now this guy that had been a Republican now was stirring up all this hatred about Thomas Jefferson, the same man. And was laying in the White House in the office when this great guy from Germany came, and he said, this guy should be locked up. Look at this slanderous things he's saying about you. This can't be true. And he said, fold up this newspaper, put it in your pocket, go back to Europe and tell them where you found this newspaper. One day, Jefferson was coming back from his daily horse ride. He rode almost every day, as much as 30 miles or 3 or 4. Came back, and he was just in common clothing, and there was a man walking along the road there in early Washington. And he stopped to talk to him, and the guy started just ripping on Thomas Jefferson, just saying he was a horrible man, he was an atheist, he was a vile person. He was, in other words, he was repeating the fake news. And Thomas Jefferson said, have you ever met the president? He said, why, no, I wouldn't even care to meet him. He said, are you afraid to meet him? And this man said, well, no, of course I'm not afraid to meet him. He said, well, how about if I could arrange for you to come to the White House tomorrow and meet you there at 10 o'clock, and then you can tell them how you feel. Does that seem fair? I said, yeah, I guess so. 10 o'clock the next morning, this guy shows up, a big industrial or big businessman from Kentucky, shown in to Jefferson's office, and of course he turned bright red and knew what had happened. And Jefferson said to him, the man that you thought I was does not exist. Let us be friends and come to dinner. This is how Jefferson charmed one person after the other with the truth of his character. and who he really was. And so, the man that wrote this book, these 6 books, and this book, say that it couldn't possibly have happened. They quoted like the grandson Peter, Thomas Jefferson Randolph, that lived his whole life at Monticello. So that they knew who did it. It was Peter Carr, Dabney Carr's son. He had this shameful and notorious relationship with Sally Hemings. Now we've heard about DNA. There was 24 men in the lineage of Jefferson that could have fathered one of the Sally Hemings children. They were positive it was this Peter Carr. Also, Thomas Jefferson never had a male child getting any older than infancy. So more people are saying that the odds of him being the father of these children were remote. But the main reason was that he was so incredibly disciplined, working all the time, answering letters all the time, sometimes 8-10 hours a day answering letters as he got older. And he wrote letters to this Peter Carr telling him, avoid immorality, because he'd heard the rumors. He said, whatever you do, don't destroy your character. Catechize yourself daily. And then he said, whatever you do, imagine that the whole world is seeing what you're doing. And then later on, he wrote that himself in his last term of his presidency. I would that everyone knew everything I'd ever done or ever thought. That's what Thomas Madison and Monroe and these guys said about him. That another guy, Thurlow Adams, said that virtually all of the rumors about Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings can be traced back to the same James Callender. In the first term, as Thomas Jefferson was getting more and more popular, he drowned in 3 feet of water in the James River. He'd been seen drunk earlier in the day. There's debate whether or not he killed himself or not. One of Thomas Jefferson's friends went over and whacked him with a cane. People were progressively more irate about this as they came to know the difference between Jefferson the man and Jefferson the victim of fake news. And so then, just think what Jefferson did. He heard that the Spanish had given Louisiana to the French. The French had established colony in Haiti, and Napoleon wanted to have a huge French empire in America. Thomas Jefferson wrote one of the Federalists were calling for war on France. Thomas Jefferson said, please, we've got to avert war. So he sent this genius letter to Napoleon. It had 2 parts. To his ambassador, that Livingston that was with him at the beginning. He said, if you occupy New Orleans, you will force us to marry Britain and their navy. Oh. And, by the way, we'd sure love to buy New Orleans. Little did Jefferson know that the Haitian ex-slaves were rising up in an uproar against the French that was just horrific. 30,000 Frenchmen died to the irate, slaves. Between being slaughtered and dying of yellow fever. Napoleon said blankety blankety blank as he cursed coffee, sugar, and the Caribbean. So he said to his ambassador said to Livingston, why didn't you buy the whole thing for $15 million? And that's 2.8 cents per acre. That's 530 million acres. Livingston said, I think so, yeah, that'd be pretty good. And remember, they didn't have telephones, and they didn't have cable, and they didn't have communication, so he had to have ships going back and forth. So Jefferson jumped on it as fast as he could, realizing that this would secure the port, the Mississippi, all the way up and down, the greatest delivery system of goods to the world from America, and added 14 states. right up to the Rocky Mountains. Then he sends off with great instructions the Lewis and Clark guys who teamed up with Sacagawea. How do you say that? Sacagawea. Yeah, I have a little bit of a stuttering problem. But so did Thomas. So that's all right. But what they did was just fantastic. They recorded and brought back every kind of thing you could imagine and went all the way to the Pacific and dealt greatly with all the Native Americans along the way. Came back and brought Thomas Jefferson 2 grizzly bears. So he had 2 grizzly bears at the White House until they got too big and ate him. No. I'm not supposed to lie when I'm wearing his hat. No. He just got too big, he sent him off to the zoo. But he did have another little pet in the White House that I like to mention. He had Dick the Mockingbird, who when he would play his violin, Dick would sing along with him. And would come and take little food out of his mouth, looked like they were kissing, Dick and him. So I don't know, he must have been all right with that side of himself. So, but then, his greatest joy in his second term was to pass a law in March of 1807 banning all African slave trade. How many people knew that? Not one kid is being taught that this great man that fought against slavery from 25 years old in the Virginia House of Burgesses until he was president in 1807, his second term. Because the Constitution, in order to get it signed onto by Georgia and South Carolina, had to put a 20-year window on abolishing the slave trade. So by this time, he got Monroe and Madison to just marshal it. They were thrilled and ecstatic. They wanted to make sure not another one of these horrible ships went over there. So that was astounding. He beat Wilberforce, who ended the slave trade in England by 3 weeks. And that, plus the Declaration of Independence, inspired Abe Lincoln to write the Emancipation Proclamation. Everybody on the left, people like Frederick Douglass and so many abolitionists were crying out that you got to do it right now from as early as 1862, but we were losing the war. He said, we have got to do it after we win, and he'd been praying about it, and he felt that he promised God that if we had a big victory, then he would do the Emancipation Proclamation. So, Antietam, bloody as it was, bloodiest day of the war, but he forced Lee back for a while out of Virginia. He went into his cabinet and said, I'm not asking you for permission, I'm doing this, because I made a promise to myself and God. And we're going to have the Emancipation Proclamation. The absolute jubilation. 4 million people. 130,000 of them rushed north to join up in the Union Army. Booker T. Washington was talking about his mother on her knees, praying for Lincoln, praying that she could see the day when they would be free. The spiritual holy wonder of the Declaration of Independence that came to fruition when we won the Civil War with so much blood, 600 to 1 million deaths. It is so incredibly absurd to talk about reparation when we had millions of young white boys fighting unto death to free the slaves and to reunite our union. So, but the genius of doing all this, that's triggered all this, was Thomas Jefferson. He retired to Monticello, and he continued after he was done to study, experiment, and answer correspondence up to 8 hours a day. But he kept riding his pony, Old Eagle, until just weeks before he passed. He kept asking, as it got tougher for him to exist, is it the 4th of July yet? And shortly after midnight, that was the last thing he said, is it the 4th of July? Which was the 50th anniversary of July 4th, of the birth of America. The last words of John Adams, who by now had been completely reconciled, said, Jefferson lives. These two great men died on the 50th anniversary of the 4th of July. I'm sorry. God governs in the affairs of men. Amen. This is a profound double, triple, quadruple wink from our Maker. Now, I've partially answered most of the 5 biggest charges against him already in the body of what I'm saying, but I want to get a little tighter to it. 1, Jefferson had slaves, and therefore he supported slavery, and therefore he should be dismissed and thrown out of every history book, because what he gave us, the country is just built on slavery that came here in 1619. Not to ever mention the price of 1776 or 1861 through 65. Well, he freed his slaves that wanted to, he trained a chef to cook like in French. But he got so good at it, he wanted to go and do it up north. So he said, all right, you can go and do that if you train your brother to be a chef. So he did. And then he took off, and he actually paid Jefferson a few bucks. Another guy wanted to go and work. He was a very competent. He did everything on the plantation. They made nails. They did everything. Made all their food. 250 things growing in the garden. It was just an amazing little world there. Here's another guy that he gave. He gave him 30 bucks and sent him off his way with his full blessing. He would have freed all of his slaves, but he was so popular after George Washington died. For the next 27 years, he was the most beloved man in America. And the whole world made pilgrimages to Monticello. People from all over, children of children, and all of these pursuits that he studied, from horticulture to astronomy to physics, came to see him. People that had fought in the war had been with him here, there, and the other place, and he couldn't turn them away. They ate him out of house and home. There was nights when he had 50 people sleeping at Monticello. He was so beloved. So he also said that he has sworn an oath, an eternal oath, on the altar of God against every form of tyranny against the mind of man. But here's the thing that really clinches this whole thing about slavery. He wrote this in the Declaration of Independence, and it was cut. How many people knew what he said about slavery in the first draft of the Declaration of Independence? This is what he wrote, talking about King George III. He has waged cruel war against human nature itself, violating the most sacred rights of life and liberty of a distant people who never offended him, captivating and carrying them into slavery in another hemisphere, or to incur miserable death in the transportation thither. Determined to keep open a market where men should be bought or sold, he has suppressed every legislative attempt to end or curb this execrable practice. Later, Thomas Jefferson said in reference to slavery, "Indeed, I tremble for my country when I reflect that God is just, that his justice cannot sleep forever." There's no doubt here. They called him an atheist or a deist. His life works prove he believed and prayed to a God that heard prayers. He called for a fasting and prayer. He had church in the rotunda while he was president and attended. But you see, where this came from is the Danbury Baptists who were really worried about the Anglicans, who in Virginia made people go to church, made people tithe. They literally taxed them. They were hounded. The Baptists were hounded as being unorthodox and not being worthy, even though they were on fire for calling people to repentance. So he gave all kinds of money to all of that sort of thing. And he called himself an unadulterated follower of the teachings of Christ late in his life. Every night before he went to bed, in a letter that surfaced after he died, he had the Gospels, he called them the Apostles, in French, French, Latin, Greek, and English, and he studied them every night of his life. When his great friend, John Adams' wife, Abigail, passed, he told her, "I believe you will see her and be reunited with her in heaven." This is not an atheist or a deist. Deists believe that all God is a clockmaker, creates some natural laws like gravity and takes off. The fourth one was when these Baptists wrote him a letter that said he was the father of kicking the prayer and Bible out of the school. because he wrote the letter saying, "You will be protected by a wall of separation between you and the federal government." Now, what does it say in the First Amendment? Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion or the free exercise thereof. Modern times has turned that upside down. The Warren Court did an egregiously unconstitutional act denying the students of America the most important book in all of history. And they just about finished off the Constitution too. So then you get down to the whole James Callender thing. His son said he never even looked at it crosswise. The DNA thing gives him great support. But the great men like him, Dumas, the man that got the Pulitzer Prize for the greatest biography ever written about Thomas Jefferson, said it's unthinkable and absurd. This man could not have carried on such a vulgar liaison, unbeknownst to his family. They lived in close quarters with each other. So as Abe Lincoln, I say to these 5 charges, is there even, beyond a shadow of a doubt, he is guilty of being a slave owner, a slave master, a perpetrator of slavery, and a rapist of a woman in his charge, an atheist or a deist, one to kick the Bible and prayer out of school when at the same time he's having church in the middle of the Capitol and going? This man is innocent of all these charges. But much more importantly than that, this great man has been besmirched and belittled, compromised in the minds of our children, to where they don't love his declaration like they should. This is our nation's creed. This is what makes us totally unique in the history of mankind, that our rights come from a place bigger than any king or any Biden or Trump, bigger than any government, and they are unalienable. They cannot be changed. Our rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit, not the guarantee, came from this great man, this genius, inspiration. So I just have to say, thank you for coming tonight. Let me pour out my heart. But just like this man who wrote one book and said, I'm going to write one book, and ended up with 6, and just overwhelmed by the stuff that lays beside of the road. I've read excerpts from scores and scores of his letters. This man was brilliant and struggled with truth. He said, follow truth wherever it leads you. This man should be taught in every school and every college in America, because he had it. James Madison said he was the greatest intellect, the greatest student of any public figure ever. Many, many great people called him the greatest ever. But what he did is he plugged in to the eyes of Jupiter Evans. He looked at his little buddy. Then he saw another one of his little buddies getting whipped. I don't know, that's conjecture. But he was so repulsed by the brutality of one race to another, the inhumanity of very sad and pitiful men that were teaching their children to hate and teaching another race to fear and cower. In many places it was illegal to even teach them how to read. Thomas Jefferson loved all people. All people. He said there is no aristocracy except the talented and the virtuous. He's someone we can look up to and emulate. He's someone we should try to be like, and the best way we can do that is embrace the Declaration of Independence word by word and make it part of our lives, and then come to where I have come, where every one of you guys that have been in service have come, where you people that are representing us have come. Come to this place where I pledge my life, my honor, and all my wealth to the truth that all men are created equal, and that I will die and fight against all enemies of this Constitution, foreign and domestic. We are coming to a point where things don't change. It's going to get really rough. So the sooner we make that pledge and begin to plan contingencies and what do we do if this happens and that continues to happen. There is no doubt they don't believe in private property ownership, the right to bear arms, they hate religion, they hate Christianity. I'm talking about so many of the powerful people in our country. So make that pledge with me. Make that pledge. Pledge your lives, your fortunes, and your sacred honor to the beautiful truth that all of us are created equal and loved by God, way beyond this life. So fear not. Thank you for coming. We're going to take a break, and then I want to have Rogers come up here. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you so very, very much.